you're like the one guest that had so much in the before we hit record that we hit record. It's like, oops. So I want to make sure we get this going. All right.
I,
So
I'm a talker.
we have established that he has several titles and he's a very modest Mason. But I just want to go through it here in the very beginning of the intro, and then we're just going to refer to him as Brother Chad for the rest of this conversation.
Sounds
He's
great.
Right Worshipful Chad Kopenski. He is one of the most forward-thinking Masonic educators today. He's a past master. That includes being the Ohio Lodge of Research and a founder of the Royal Schofield Society. We're going to talk about all those things on this episode of Rethinking Ritual, which is his program. But first, welcome to the Craftsman Online podcast, Brother Chad.
It is an honor to be here. This is very exciting for me.
Yeah.
Um, I'm kind of sequestered in Ohio at this point, and so the only way I get out is usually electronically this way.
Same thing, dude. I can't tell you how many brothers I have virtually met. And then when I do get a chance to actually see them in person now, I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. Like, it's crazy, this new way of making friends.
Do you go to
Let's,
any of the conventions? Like, do you go to like the Chicago Masonic Con, Kansas Masonic Con, Esoteric Con, anything like that?
I have not ventured out that way yet. I need to get out to those,
Okay.
but we'll probably bump into each other there, I imagine.
Same thing. Guys you see online, and then you meet them, and you're like, you're tall. You have height as well as depth and breadth.
Right.
So
very true.
sorry.
Well, I want to talk about before we get into Rethinking Ritual, your program, why you're here, because I love how you really the title of it is so simple and the idea is so awesome. I want to talk about some of your past roles that you've had. What is the
Okay.
What is the Royal Schofield Society?
Okay. In 30 seconds, and less than that.
Take as much time as you need.
Okay. It is an educational honor society that was started in Ohio, where membership is earned by completing a set of tasks. The tasks have 3 levels, and the idea behind it is essentially to give a Mason a background of knowledge, help them understand who they are, and what Masonry means to them, and then sort of where they fit or what their purpose is in Masonry. This was something that we took an idea from Maryland, and a guy named our past Grandmaster Jess Rains brought it to us from Maryland, and then we kind of Ohioized it. We took it and made it sort of personal for Ohio. The brethren completing these levels, it kind of think about almost like the circumpunct guy standing in the middle, and that circle just starts getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then gets more defined. The first level is basically just a set of baseline knowledge about our ritual. What we found is that um, in theory, being a master mason should mean something. In theory, that you should be able to go to any different, lodge in your state or anywhere, and the guys there should have a baseline of knowledge about masonry and the ritual.
Amen.
It can be different and at different levels, but there's something. There's got to be a basics, there, and so that's where that starts. Then after that, the second level, we give them great names like Pillars of the Craft and Fellows of the Craft. The second level involves someone doing research. We ask them to look at their own lineage in Masonry. We ask them to travel within their district. We ask them to basically kind of get outside their own little lodge, because as we can talk about, one of the biggest dangers in Masonry is that we kind of get in a bubble. We think that Masonry somewhere is the same as Masonry everywhere. Every level has sort of a culminating activity. And that second level for us, we call it the working tools letter. There's a lot of writing in this because we've realized that there's something powerful about asking somebody to write, to create. So often in Masonry, we are kind of just told that this is what something means. So we really wanted to get guys to start thinking and start finding and developing their own voice. But this working tools letter, we ask them to actually sit and write, what do the working tools actually mean to them, and how have they incorporated that into their lives? And I got to tell you that that writing has truly been some of the most amazing Masonic writing I have ever read in my life. It is
Hmm.
personal, it is honest. In some ways, it is really informative. It's also illuminating because people, brethren, have ideas I never thought about. Ask
Hmm.
guys to get out of something local and kind of see how they fit in masonry. So we do ask them to look at different religions or different codes, like Masonic codes in other jurisdictions, something that's outside their time and tradition, and look at it from a critical standpoint. To read some of the books that are out there in masonry, to travel outside of their district, whether it's at the state level or at another district or some of those conventions we talked about. Um, we ask them to mentor a candidate, either through the degrees. We ask them to give a lecture or the 3 charges from memory in a lodge. We ask them to serve as an education officer in their lodge. And the 2 big culminating things of that last level of the Royal Schofield Society. One is what we call the Sprig of Acacia letter. We ask the gentleman to write a letter to their lodge to be read 50 years from now.
Hmm.
So
That's cool.
imagine like, yeah. So imagine if right now the the master who raised you, and I don't know how old he is or what, but imagine if all of a sudden, before some meeting, a letter shows up from that dude when he was a newly raised master mason 50 years ago.
Mm.
Just kind of saying who he was, what masonry meant to him, what just we don't read it. We just the guy reads the letter. We put it in the Grand Lodge Museum, and we just promise that we're going to deliver it 50 years from now. And we chose 50 years because the likelihood is that there's going to be somebody in that lodge that still knows the dude. I mean, that's the ideal.
One would hope, yeah.
Um,
That's awesome. Now,
yeah,
where did you get the
and the
idea for the
oh,
name Royal Schofield? What does that mean?
we lost the last one, which is the masterpiece, but that's okay. Royal Schofield, and this I tell a joke about this because Royal Schofield was a past Grand Master of Ohio, and um, he was the chairman of the education committee for something like 30 years. He was heavily involved in the Midwest Conference on Masonic Education. He was a fellow of the Philalethes Society. He was one of those guys who was a powerhouse of education from Ohio, and actually, on the national level, from the 50s through the 90s or so,
Hmm.
and really kind of set a particular direction in Ohio that in many ways has kind of influenced some of our other states. I did not grow up in Ohio. And so as we were looking for a name, the 2 gentlemen that worked with me on this, they said, hey, I got a great, we're talking about a name. This is Jess Raines, past Grand Master, Charlie Murphy, past Grand Master. They said, we're going to name it the Royal Schofield Society. And I said, great. What the hell is a Schofield? And so that
It sounds
they
very
still kind of
English.
give me, right. I'm uh, like what? It's a pepper with a crown on it. Like, what is this thing? So,
Now
but
here's what I love about this. You took, and for brothers that are listening, like, oh, this is interesting. I know in New York we have modified certain Masonic ideas, like our North Star program is part of something that Ohio
it's a
did, and
very
also
good program.
Michigan
Hmm.
did, yeah, and we're using that.
Yep.
And as you said, you Ohioized it, we New Yorkized it. We make it work for us. But I think it's important for brothers to hear that when you see ideas working in other grand jurisdictions, that at the highest level, our Grand Lodge leaders should be going like, "Hey, what works, and how can we make that work here and make this a repeatable success?"
There is, but there's a danger with that. Yes, I totally agree with you. I mean, and that's kind of the whole idea behind the Midwest Conference on Masonic Education and a lot of the different conventions that are out there and a lot of different organizations, is that if you get brethren talking, they do share common problems, common ideas, common solutions. I think one of the problems, though, is that, or the fallacy, is that a lot of times Grand Lodge officers come back and they think that there's the one
Mm,
solution
hmm.
that will solve everything, right? If we just do open houses, if we just do 1 day classes, if we just get rid of our our proficiency requirements, that'll solve everything. And what's interesting is that probably in the last 10 years or so, there's really been more of a move towards um, letting lodges be letting lodges be lodges. Like every
Mm,
lodge should be different and have its own unique experience. And so instead of imposing a will on a lodge and saying, darn it, do this, it's more along the lines of, okay, you as a lodge, you are definitely distinct from the lodge that's 3 blocks over. So what is it that makes you you? And how do we get you to buy into this kind of ground up type of revitalization or ground up sort of initiative as opposed to a top down thing? It's
mm-hmm.
not to say that that's gone away, but um, I think nationwide you're starting to see more of a value
Right.
on the individual lodge experience and less on like that McDonald's
Mm-hmm.
franchise model of Mason,
It's a good
which we got
comparison. Yeah.
thoroughly off topic.
No, no,
But
no. It's all about
you were
ritual, and this is great because the
no,
other.
but, no, but, no, but what, uh, well, sorry, what you were saying was basically this idea of there are good ideas out there, and there absolutely are. I mean, in Masonic education, I mean, hell, we should all steal from everybody if it's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, in Ohio, we have a wardens and deacons training that um, we've called a couple different things, but we stole that from Missouri many moons ago, and so I don't feel bad about them stealing the Royal Schofield Society. Not even stealing; we gave it to them. We worked with them on it. It's just and again, we borrowed things from Wisconsin, from Michigan, from Virginia, from New York, from everybody.
Yeah.
And
No,
why not?
it's
It
what I
already
love
worked. We
about
already
the
know it's tried and
craft.
tested.
Yeah, when we can work together like that, it's amazing. I'm curious because for programs like this, the Royal Schofield Society, I'm sure the goal was, hey, we want to engage our active members. This is voluntary. They're not doing this for a special award or a fancy title. They're doing it because they're passionate about masonry and we want to keep them around other like-minded men. You're familiar with seeing this, especially in the Scottish Rite Northern Masonic jurisdiction. They have a lot of these types of programs that have been
The
successful.
Pathfinder, yeah.
Yeah. How, what was do you have any, outcome stories and any success stories of brothers that have gone through this?
Uh, and that's such an odd question because yes, but first off, when you kind of talk about the definition of success here, right?
Mm,
Because this is not to knock anything like the Pathfinder program or uh, Indiana's their own Pathfinder program. A lot of different entities. We have one in Ohio called the RWB program. This idea of task based, almost achievement based engagement programs. There's nothing wrong with those. The With the Royal Schofield Society, the intention really wasn't necessarily that you would earn membership, get your certificate, and then you'd be done. The idea was that by getting that baseline of knowledge, discovering who you are, what your purpose is in masonry, that then that gets put into action. That
mm,
um, and so for us, yes, it's great if we induct however many people a year, but for us, I think we measure success on how many of those guys that have attained the masters of the craft or membership are now in positions of leadership and now in positions of service.
impact.
Um,
Yeah. Yep.
but to your question, let me give you a really just an example of sort of how I don't know if success, but just some stories of the process. One of the things I talk about all the time is that masonry is all about meaningful connections. That that's why guys join, it's why they stay, and that's the whole thing about it. And when guys go through this journey for the Royal Schofield Society, by nature they end up just meeting other people who are either on the journey or have completed it. And so again, you tap into this network of like-minded people or people who can help you or assist you. And one of my favorite stories is, and I the example is right there, so I'm going to have to move my camera to show it.
Sure.
Um, there was a gentleman, his name is Keith Manbeck. We have this thing called a masterpiece. It's this original um, piece of research that a brother is asked to do as one of the culminating things. They work with a mentor, and Keith was a scientist, and he really wanted to look at the sprig of acacia as a symbol. And of course, he looked at it as as a scientist. So he looked at the history of the symbol, he looked at the plant, its scientific nature, and how it was, how it came into our ritual and how it was used. Um, and as I was talking to him about his project, he mentioned that his daughter had died of cancer and
Mm.
how that really had affected him. And it had kind of gotten him not out of lodge, but just he had gotten to a place where lodge didn't really have the same kind of, meaning or sustenance for him. And the brethren of his lodge called him because they needed somebody to do the masturbation lecture. And he's like, fine. And he went through there and he said he was sort of going through the motions. But then as he started talking about the sprig of acacia, all of a sudden he said something just sort of clicked. Like he
Mm.
felt his daughter's presence. Like all of a sudden, almost like in Iron Man or in Transformers, where the pieces start clicking into place,
Hmm.
all of a sudden this something clicked into place for him. And it illuminated that symbol to him. It made him, it was an aha moment for him in masonry, and it helped him really kind of understand more, his daughter, and help that grieving process. And I did tell him, I said, Keith, like that's the good part of what you're talking about right now. The science and everything is great, but what really kind of makes this a masterpiece is that exploration. And so what Keith did is, yes, he wrote the paper, but then he also went to the Holy Land, but he got acacia from the Holy Land, and he took the acacia and he put it in the shape of a square and compasses in a shadow box, and it hangs up on the wall of his lodge. And so now when they do that lecture and they're walking the guide, they stop in front of this sprig of acacia
That's
from the Holy
awesome.
Land.
That's very
And
cool.
and it's something that connects the brethren, something that connects the lodge, something it's um and so that to me is a success, because here's a gentleman who got a baseline of knowledge, helped to understand, what masonry means to him, like where he comes from, for lack of a better word, and then what his purpose is. This is who I am, what masonry means to me, and this is how I'm going to give back. And I'm going to take what I've learned and use it in the service of others. That to
Mm.
me is a success of the program, more than numbers or a really cool certificate or a medal or whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah. You gave masonry meaning, and that is an amazing success story. And we talk about thinking beyond ritual, and again, thank you for the bonus time here to talk about the Schofield Society, or the Royal Schofield Society. But here's a perfect example of just brothers getting together, an idea. I'm sure there was quite the process of putting this all together and how are we going to do this training and then launching it.
I want to tell you the story of that, because that to me, I think, is actually, in my mind, more of, it's also quite interesting. Um, okay. And I'll do this in a short amount of time because, the two guys who, I mean, there were three of us in that initial conversation. Um, Charlie Murphy, past Grandmaster, Jess Raines, past Grandmaster, and me, a schlub from, a small town in Wisconsin, from Milwaukee, now in a really small town in Ohio, right? Um, I'm the only person in that conversation whose first name isn't Most. I joke with them. And we said, okay, we're going to do this. We had a general idea. Um, and they said, okay, who's your team? And we we wanted people from the different corners of Ohio, and we needed them to be incredibly different in terms of their history and their mindset. We had a guy who was just getting done being worshipful master. We had a guy who'd been a Mason for 50 years. We had people who were politically quite conservative, quite liberal. We
Mm.
had some who were Christian, some who were Jewish. We had, and there were five of us. And every single idea out of the 15 things, like the 15 tasks that we came up with, every idea was absolutely tested and pushed and defined and argued over. I have the emails, and there there were incredibly passionate and um, not even angry, but just brethren were absolutely passionate and absolutely fervent in their beliefs. But once the right idea came along, we all recognized it and jumped on it to the point that right now, um, of the five of us that kind of that initial team that from the first group of regents that oversaw this, none of us can really tell you whose idea was whose. We might say that, but truth is, there's this great idea, but then Josh added to this and Ken added to this. And I remember that, John and Ken really argued over this, but we found this thing. And so it really was very disparate, different brethren coming together, finding the common ground, finding the common purpose, and finding the right thing to do and moving it forward. And when I think of when they put me in the ground, what I, besides being a good dad and a good husband and all that stuff, what I really hope that somebody writes about me is that they write about that process of creating the Royal Schofield Society, because that to me, that was my, uh,
Hmm.
Masonic aha moment,
Yeah,
or
that was your
one
gift
of
to the
them.
craft for sure. Yeah. All right, let's talk about
Sure.
you. I want to get into rethinking ritual.
All right.
One of the
Yes.
terms that you use to describe yourself, which I'm sure gets a laugh in every lodge, is a Masonic has-been. So let's start there, Brother Chad. What's the story behind that
Yep.
nickname? Oop. Do we still have them?
Sir passed. Am I still here?
Yeah,
Hello,
my
hello.
internet's my internet's getting choppy.
Okay. And I should slow down because I'm sure I'm.
No, you're fine.
That
Just start reset because I missed all
keep
of
going.
the yeah.
Yep. So yeah, I have a shady Masonic past, or at least I have a Masonic past. Past master of my local lodge, past district deputy, grand master, and past district education officer. Um, I am the past chairman of the Grand Lodge Education Committee, past member of the uh, membership committee, past president of the Midwest Conference. Um, I got a lot of pasts. Past founding regent of the Rose Schofield Society, past master of the Ohio Lodge of Research, and I mean, I don't know. I joke about that because I think when I first came into Masonry, I I noticed a shift. There was definitely the idea of going from you know respect. I don't say respect in the office, but this idea of as soon as somebody walked in with a fancy apron, you kowtowed and bowed, to this
Mm-hmm.
idea of more servant leadership. Instead of me walking in and saying, "I am Chad," it's more like it is. It's you know, I have a job, I have a role, I'm here to help, and um, I do kind of get sort of poo-pooey, and it isn't a false modesty. I am proud of the thing I've done. I really am, but I don't feel like I'm done yet. Like that's the thing, and I think that that's what for Masonry we're really good about titles and really good about completion and putting things on the shelves, but that's not really what Masonry is supposed to be. Masonry is supposed to be a practice, right? It's supposed to be something that you put into action, put into play every single day. Some days you win, some days you lose, but and so I always like it when people ask me like, "What are you working on now?" as opposed to what I done in the past. And
Mm.
listen, that's kind of crappy for me to say that because you know your your listeners want to know why they should listen to me. But also, I guess my hope is that within 5 seconds of talking to me, you realize I either know something or I can offer something to help, or at least I'll be entertaining. That if I can get those three in the first 5 seconds, no, you know, if I can't get that in the first 5 seconds, nothing of my resume that I pull up and say, look at all the cool stuff I've done is going to change your mind.
Well, you're like the epitome of the phrase you get what, out of Freemasonry what you put into it, right? And for somebody like you, it's
Mm.
like, yes, you have all of these titles, but it's just because you're invested. This you have a lot of passion. This is what you do. It's also interesting when you kind of marry your love of the craft for what your trade is. You're an educator. So I'd like to get more into how your professional life. How did that kind of shape the journey that you're going through in Freemasonry? And has there been any help from being a professional educator when especially when it comes to something as tough as Masonic education?
See, this is where you're gonna like you're gonna end up getting off on a weird tangent because you mentioned Masonic education, and what I have heard way too many definitions of what like education is. I mean, I really do think that one of the best 80,000 different.
Mm.
Let me answer your question in a different way. So, I want you to think of the best teachers you've ever had. Do you think that they were born that way, or do you think that they were trained to be that way?
Hmm. That's good. Okay. Um,
Right? I mean, ask.
I think I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think they have a natural talent, but I also think that they their perspective is just shaped by so much experience. So they had a good teacher, which makes them a great teacher.
I would agree with that. Very often, especially in education, people can only pass on what they've been given, uh, you know, or they can take different things that they have been given and they can kind of blend them together. Um, and some of that is absolutely innate. You're absolutely right. So I've always been a little bit of a storyteller. My background is I discovered theater and martial arts at the same time at a really formative place in my life, and believe it or not, those two have far more overlap than people think that they do, especially when you look at it in terms of the idea of intention. What are
Mm.
you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? And there's a lot of analysis that goes into that. Now, believe it or not, that also comes over into education. When I am, if I'm trying to teach a class something, right, I have a goal. At the end of this class period, I want them to accomplish certain things. So, what's my intention? How am I going to get them there? Some of that is innate, right? Being a storyteller, being somebody who, um, I have one of those. I hate to be that guy's like, I got a weird brain, but I got a weird brain. Um, I I tend to think in flowcharts. I tend to think in bullet lists. That's one of my only real skills is I can take something complex and break it down to um, particular steps and then communicate those to others. And the things that I've learned in through theater, through martial arts, through my teacher training, through you my education, have been different tools or different ideas or um, different things that I can rely on in terms or different areas that I can draw from to help realize my intention. Right? If you want to make it even, for your listeners who are out there, oops, that's not me. Um,
Sorry, that was me.
in theater, in theater, you'll talk about like your objectives, right? What is it you're trying to accomplish? And then you just talk about tactics, right? How are you going to accomplish what you want to accomplish? And so that ends up being a lot of that ends up being sort of how all the things in my life have kind of come together. You get a library of things that you can use to accomplish what it is you want to accomplish. In education, you end up getting a lot of different ideas, and you do beg, borrow, and steal from really good people. And so,
Mm. You've shared your presentation, Rethinking Ritual, with me, and I know you got it on your screen. So if you want to go ahead and share it so that our YouTube live streamers can actually see a little bit of it, I wanted to.
okay, but I'm also thinking like now this. I'm a big believer in that our limitations are our opportunities. So if you're going to have me do this without the slides, this is awesome. I can totally do it without the slides, unless you want to see them. I don't care.
No, we'll go without it. Well, I wanted to jump into your presentation because the concept of rethinking ritual, just hearing your background story, now knowing more about your passion with the craft, your professional, skills all marrying together here. When I started going through your deck, I was really kind of impressed that you compare your kind of your framing devices. You're comparing Masonic ritual to a family's Christmas dinner. And that's a
Yep.
fantastic analogy. I never would have ever thought that before. Can you walk us through this and why it's such a powerful statement?
You're killing me here. So the reason why you're killing me is because I kind of want to tell the story. Like that's what ends up giving it sort of the power. But I will tell you how I came up with this. How about that? Um,
Sure.
Actually, not even. I'm not even into that because um, one of the big jokes in Ohio Masonic education is that never let the truth get in the way of a good story, and I'm a firm believer of that. You know, some people have learned to never ask me whether a story is true because I'm like, it's not. Whether or not it's true is not why I'm telling you the story. But I have a family that is incredibly, we're all a little different. I have a twin sister, I have an older sister, I have a stepmother and a brother and a half brother, and like we're all married. It's all a thing. Um, I think that our brethren have sort of lost the idea of what ritual is supposed to be, like what the
Mm,
purpose of our ritual is. We think about it as this performative thing. We think about it as this thing of like, I have to go there. I have to get my words right. I have to, you know, I have to. And I want brethren to just take a second and think about it differently. And I want them to think about our ritual like it's Christmas dinner. When you think about Christmas dinner, um, in most families, it's one of those things where people come together at right one time, and there's certain things that only happen at that time, right? The good china comes out,
mm.
you dress up, certain foods happen, certain stories get told, certain traditions happen. And why do we do those things? There's a reason why we do those things. Those things happen because there's both a descriptive and a prescriptive element of this. The story that I use to kind of frame this all is my twin sister bringing her then boyfriend into my family and having him go through three different family events where one of my brothers, my other brother-in-law, sort of took him aside and said, "All right, this is the Kopenski, thing. Here are the players. Here's the things you need to do. Here's how you're going to get through this particular event. Here's the
Mhm.
stuff you need to know. All right, we got you. Go do." Right. And then, that was Flag Day. And the next came Thanksgiving. And Thanksgiving is a whole other thing because, um, you know, my mom used to open up Thanksgiving to anybody in the world. And so we'd have like 70 people for Thanksgiving. So, right, different rules, different sort of things you need to be aware of. Um, Christmas is the big one. That's just the family. Anyway, um, but if you're the prescriptive and descriptive thing, we do these things at these times and only these times. As a descriptive um, element is to say, this is who we are. These are the things that we value. We value these stories, these items, these things. But it's also a prescriptive thing. If you want to come into our family, you got to know what you're getting into. You got to know that
Mm.
we value these items. We value these ideals. We value these times, these moments, these stories, these people. Um, and we do those things because what we are doing is we are forging, maintaining, and celebrating these meaningful connections that transcend things like time, distance, and death. There are connections in our lives that transcend things like time, distance, and death. And the example that I give in my family is there is a Polish or a Slavic tradition called the oplotic. It's this little like cracker. And what you're supposed to do is, um, as the meal starts, you break off a little piece of this communion wafer. Some families might say what they're thankful for, but they'll just, say Merry Christmas and pass along, along the table. It's the idea of breaking bread with the people at the table,
Mm.
of that sacrifice, or that idea of like we do this at this time and only this time. And by doing it, we recognize that it's a connection with being Polish. We recognize that this is something that Poles are doing around the world. That when my dad died in 2001, and um, all of a sudden the job fell to me. Wait, this thing, this ritual, this little activity, I can reconnect with my dad and my grandfather and my heritage. And
Mm.
um, during COVID, when I couldn't go to my mom's house for Christmas, when she was able to down to visit me, she brought the oplotic from the table. So my rest of my family who were there, they were able to do that, and then she gave it to me so that my family could do it. So even though we weren't there in spirit or in person, it was yet another way that we could celebrate those connections that transcend things like time, distance, and death.
Mm.
And so, what that means for us as Masons is that we need to stop thinking about our ritual as lifeless, as as drudgery. We need to think about it like a Christmas dinner. We are bringing somebody into our family. As a family, we are gathering to kind of tell those stories and to revisit those things that are meaningful to us,
Mm.
to touch, to forge, to strengthen, and to maintain and celebrate those connections that transcend things like time, distance, and death.
Yeah, I love this because you're talking a little bit of it's the performative part of the ritual. You're putting in the meaning of the ritual, but also you're injecting your lodge's DNA, that culture, into the new brother, the candidate that's coming through. And now you're showing them how to be a Mason. And it's a conversation I've had. I need to start writing my theories down. There's like the way to do things, and then there's the way to do things. And of course, our ritual says this, but the way that we perform it and talk about it, that's the Masonic education part. That's how we're transferring that knowledge to the next guy.
Do you? They have proficiencies in New York, I'm assuming.
Oh
They,
yeah.
yeah. In Ohio, we have the long form, right? Whence came you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We have a short form, which is just the obligation modes of recognition, and we have something called the principles proficiency, which is more talking about the lessons. Anyway, what I also talk about in this is that, like, what's the purpose of our proficiencies?
Mm.
We think about it as like, I'm going to teach you this ritual and you better learn it. No, 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 no. Think about our proficiencies.
Right.
Think about our proficiencies like you are walking through your mom's house or your grandmother's house and looking at the pictures on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why the hell is a picture of grandpa with Harry Truman? Hold on. Like, the proficiency is a way for us, it's a mechanism for a brother to talk to a new brother and teach him how to be a Mason and how to be a Mason and a member of that lodge. The proficiency is just the mechanism, but the intention behind it, the purpose behind it, isn't just being able to recite that catechism word for word.
Mm-hmm.
It's so that when the guy I'm mentoring says to me, well, hold on, what does this mean? And we talk about, well, here's what that means, and this here's what I think it is, or man, I don't know. Let's go find this out together. Um, I will say that one of the wonderful things that we're getting kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but um, one of the best conversations I think a lodge can have is, and I've done this as lodge education programs. I said, brethren, I want you to think about your EA degree. Okay. tell me a moment that like is really important to you, that really sticks with you, like that when you think back on that night, like what is it that really like sticks out in your mind? And the brethren start talking about it, and they all have different things, right? Like um, my EA degree was on January 5th. They didn't turn the heat on in the prep room. I was freezing my booty off, right? Um, and I mean that's something that I remember, but that's not the most important thing. I, for me, when they brought me in and somebody said, um, arise, follow your guide, and fear no danger. For a second, I thought to myself, hold on, nobody talks like that. So that means that was probably written into the ritual, and that means that probably more than likely that there have been generations where they realize that this is kind of a weird thing what you're doing, being blindfolded and
Mm-hmm.
less than clothed and in a room where it's really uncomfortable, but to actually say, you know, follow your guide and fear no danger. For me, that's the moment that means a lot to me. And so, as I'm talking to the brethren, I'm like, I really want to make sure that our candidate kind of has the same sensation that I do, that they really understand, like, and they're not going to understand it without context. I'll tell them about it later. But I
Mm-hmm.
really want to emphasize, I don't want to gloss over that moment. And another guy will say, you know what it was for me? When they put the apron on me for that first time, my dad did it. And when he did it, he just yanked on that string. So it's like, and it wasn't a hazing thing as much as I think it just to kind of, so that I really felt it. And I felt that weight or that pressure
Mm.
of the apron around my waist. And I understood, especially with what they were saying, that I was now bound. I was now bound and obligated I am because they put the apron on me.
Mm.
So I have an obligation. And as a lodge, we're like, whoa, that's awesome. And as we talked about this, now we think, okay, well, how do we how do we make sure that our new guys coming in that they have a similar experience? So yeah, we crank on that string, but also when the education officer talks to them afterwards, we say like, do you remember this? Do you remember why we did this?
Mm.
Great. Now let's talk about like proficiency. Let's talk about why we did that. You know, this is something that we value as a lodge, you know, descriptive and prescriptive. And so when lodges start talking about those moments, how do we create an event like a Christmas dinner that celebrates who we are as a family, but also for people coming in, how do we help them how do we help them fit in? How do we help them get through Christmas dinner without pissing off grandma or like, in such a way that they get invited back?
Well, you kind of
So,
provide some stair steps for brothers to follow in your program because it's built around the three pillars of intentional ritual. And you make some key points. I want to hit the first one here, which is know your role. And this is really
yep.
for the officers, the brothers that are there, the degree team. What do you mean by know your role? I'm guessing it's more than just know your part.
Yes. So if I were to ask probably most of your listeners, they would and said like, okay, who's the most important person in the room during the A degree? They're like, wow, candidate. Candidate's the most important person in the room. Okay. In the example of Christmas dinner, think about Christmas dinner at like your mom's house. Who's the most important person at that Christmas dinner?
Whoever's doing all the cooking.
Well, yeah, but not even that. There's also right. There's also your siblings because maybe they're bringing things, or
Mm.
they're helping to polish the silver, or they're helping to keep people like calm, or they're doing the entertaining. There's also just your weird Uncle Al who comes in. Like there's a reason why he's there. I mean, you may not see him the rest of the time, but he's there at Christmas. He has a role there too. And so, what I ask brethren to do is recognize that there's nothing passive about our ritual. It drives me nuts when I see a third of the guys get up and leave the room right before the lecture starts, or they're on their phone. Or the one that bothers me the most is when they start practicing, you know, their ritual while everything else is going on. I'm
Mm.
thinking, you know, if you are an officer, right, you have a role there this during the degree, kind of like a Christmas dinner, right? You're doing the cooking, you're carving the turkey, like you have a particular job that you need to do. But the candidate also has a particular role, right? They're the new guy coming in, and there's people around him to kind of keep him safe and make sure that things go well. But the people on the sidelines also have a particular role. If we do these things at these times to forge, you know, strengthen and celebrate those connections that transcend things like time, distance, and death, that's what your job is on the sidelines. Your job is not to check out. Your job is to recognize that there's somebody new coming into your family. And that, in a way, I mean, this is the weirdest sort of, thinking, but that candidate at the altar is, in many ways, it's also you, right? You have to think about the time that you knelt at that altar, the experience you had, to remember what those obligations and those lessons were, to celebrate that there is this person coming into our family, to go to the person next to you and to reconnect and say, God, do you remember when Arlen, did that? You know, Arlen did the lecture this way. Like, you are doing yourself, the lodge, the candidate, a disservice if you remain passive during our ritual, or if you decide to not be there. Now, granted, people have all reasons not to be there, but when I talked to lodges about this, I asked them. I said, okay, if I were to tell you that we're doing conferring a degree tonight, how quickly can you come up with excuses that will get you out of coming to that degree? Now, if I tell you that Christmas dinner is tonight, what in the world are you going to be able to say to your mom or your dad or your siblings that will excuse you from being at that table?
Mm.
Because you've got a job to be at that table. You have an obligation to your mom, your dad, your siblings, whomever, your kids. How would you in the world what would it take for you to miss Christmas dinner with your kids?
Hmm.
What For me, it was a pandemic, right?
Yeah.
3 years I couldn't go see my mom, but and it, again, guys have their own reasons, but if you think about it that way, if you think about the fact that what you are doing is you are creating, you are strengthening, you are celebrating these meaningful connections. It is this reconnection with all those things that make Masonry great. Then you'll stop undervaluing it, and you'll stop sort of poo-pooing it.
Mm.
And not that I want you to take it seriously and go the Andrew Hammer route where there's like saxophones and tuxedos and elephants going through to make this really great you know experience. I don't know that there's ever elephants in lodge, but it's the first thing I thought of. But if you are creating an experience that is creating the family of your lodge, then and you focus on the connections as opposed to the words.
Yeah.
You focus on the connections as opposed to the steps. Um, One of the things that I've changed this presentation numerous times, and one of the questions I left out when I spoke to you, but I kind of put back in, was know your role. The other thing is, what do you want him to remember
Hmm.
when that person goes home and his wife says, "How was it?" What do you want him to say? What do you want him to remember? What do you want him to think of 10 years from now?
Hmm.
What it used to be, I mean, years ago when I had person give me one of the York Rite degrees, and they were so nervous about the words that every other thing they said was "I'm sorry." And by the end of it, I was sitting there making that guy. I'm just going, dude, it's fine, man. And what I remember about that, and honestly, I'm a little mad. I'm like, this is supposed to be my night. It's supposed to be a really transformative experience for me. But because you because you are keep like making it about yourself saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. You're making me think that I got a bad experience or I
Mm.
got something I shouldn't have gotten. You're making, and I didn't know any better. And you're making it about you.
Mm. Well,
So, um,
that does
sorry,
lead
go ahead.
into the second concept that you have, because the first one was
Yep.
know your
Sorry.
role. Second concept is perfect ritual, or is it perfect ritual? We can get to that. But I
Perfect
think this
ritual.
is where you kind of draw back on your theater and martial arts
Yeah.
background. How did that influence the idea of perfect ritual?
We have a huge storm outside, and so
Okay,
it's you
I
may
was
hear
wondering
the
what that was. It was like either it's my neighbors throwing their garbage cans up and down the
no, we
road,
have a
or
huge storm. Um, Luckily, my dog isn't freaking out. It's a dog. Um, there's a story that I tell about my family that, you know, my mom doesn't come off well, and so I usually don't like to tell it. But it's um, the gist of the story is that once you realize you're screwed, it's actually really liberating. Once you realize, wow,
oh
sorry,
wow, that was like a
um,
cannon.
yeah, that was pretty impressive. Now I feel like um, the story that I tell from martial arts is when you are first starting, you sit there and you're trying to throw the perfect punch. And so you sit there and you're doing all this analysis and you're training, try to get your body to move in a certain way with certain timing, try to like get, you know, this one punch to just be effective. And then as you start learning more, you realize that there's more than just one punch. There's a ton of them because they're all different angles and they're different, all different. And so then you start training from a set of principles, or you're trying to do that analysis of, I'm trying to get this all right. Then there's the application. Because the truth is, when somebody walks up to you at a restaurant and throws a punch at you, it's not going to be the perfect footwork. It's not going to be the perfect position. So what is perfect is what is right there in the moment. So what your job really is to do is not to make it perfect, like it's a state. It's the idea.
I could actually see the lightning in the window, and then I heard the thunder. Wow, that was loud.
Yeah, I'm a theater person. This is all for effect. I brought
Mm.
this all for you. Um,
Nice.
the Anyway, it's never going to be perfect, but it's that idea of perfecting it, of trying to get it to the point where you're constantly working on it. There's a great book that I think that everybody who considers themselves a ritualist should read. And it's a book called The Empty Space by Peter Brook. He is a theater practitioner. It's a series of essays about the nature of theater, the dangerous theater, the poor theater, and there's one that he calls the holy theater. And what he talks about is that um, in the holy theater, the actors know their lines, know what they're having to do so well. They've trained in such a way, and they're doing things with such an intention to create a set of circumstances that if that magical quintessence happens, you know that if that special spark happens, that there might be what he called the quickening, where there might be, it's so amazing and so perfect that you pierce the veil and you glimpse the divine or glimpse the infinite. It's not going to happen every time, but you train as actors and you train as a team to put yourself in the best possible position each time that happens. And so what the focus is less on, you have to know the words, like you have to know your lines. See, I'm talking about ritual such a way. This is like, Preston and Webb and Dan Gardner and,
the sound
all
effects,
all those,
priceless.
yeah. That they're coming after. Actually, anyway, the it is knowing the. It's not focusing on the words. It's focusing on the message, right? I think so many brethren get so worked up on the words, and that's why they start saying, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," or they start messing up. If you focus on the story that you're trying to tell, right? What is more important? Is it more important that you tell the story of Grandpa with Harry Truman the way that I tell the story, or is it more important that you tell the story about Grandpa with Harry Truman?
Mm.
What is, from a theatrical standpoint, is it important that your students know the story of Hamlet, or they know the story of Hamlet the way that Shakespeare told it? And both have a place, and both have a value, and both, like, there's not any real one right answer. But when it comes to our ritual, in my mind, I'm thinking I would much rather, as I'm talking to this, if I'm giving a lecture, if I'm helping, work with the other officers to create this experience for the candidate, I want to focus on the experience and focus on the story and focus on the journey, as opposed to whether I say harass or harass, or whether
right.
or whether it's
the instead of a they. Yeah, I totally got you. Yeah.
Oh, and also on the sidelines. Sorry, I'm kind of getting away from myself. I even as an actor, I'm not the best at, like, I can memorize lines, but I focus more on the story. And truly, the way that I memorize is I look at operative words, like what's the most important word in a sentence, and that's kind of my mnemonic. Because I figured that if I mess up all the words, if I at least get the most important sentence, the most important part of that phrase out, if I can tell the story, then I'm good. If I focus on the story and I focus on the experience, I focus on making the connection, everything else will fall into line. Now, part of that also means, as an officer group, that you have to know what you're doing, know what your role is, know what your purpose is, know what you need to do. Like, knowing the basic story, that's baseline. Once you get that done, now you can do all the cool stuff to make the quickening happen. And so recognize it is never going to be perfect. But by perfecting, by making it active, because there should never be anything passive in masonry. It is a practice, it is something that you are actively doing. You and the team of officers, you are working together to create a set of circumstances where, if you're lucky, it is transformative and divine.
Let's
And
get to
that
the
should be
third point. You talk
All right.
about focusing on the connections. And this
Yep.
part of your presentation I was really interested in, because here's the issue that we run in right now is this modern instant gratification society. And we have these guys coming in for this transformative experience, and we're trying to, make that connection with them, give them the best experience that they could possibly have. How do we, what's your advice on how we can focus on that connection during the ritual, so that it's not what's the word I'm looking for here? It's not a it was right on the tip. It's not a transactional style of an experience. It's something meaningful.
Um, sorry, this is one of those things where I get a little passionate about, but it's also in a way, I don't say it's simple, but it's just rethink what the purpose of the ritual is, and think about it like a Christmas dinner, right? So, is Christmas dinner transactional? No, it is, right? It's that time that you get to spend with cousin Mike, who you never get to see, and you get to just reconnect and retalk to him. It is that time to walk through your mom's house and be like, Mom, what are you doing there with Gregory Peck? Like, how did that happen? Right. And to hear those stories, to play, a card game with your siblings and to laugh and to tell it. And yeah, there's going to be fights, but honestly, those are some of the good stories too. Focus on the connection. So what that means is, um, the reason why I'm pausing is because I'm trying to think of like the best way to talk about this. Because
Well, you have guys that are looking to be a part of something bigger than themselves. This has been a theme,
yeah,
an unofficial theme of the podcast this year.
yeah,
And almost every episode we've touched on the male loneliness issue and the epidemic that's going on across the country.
but yeah, when I was in membership, this is kind of what this also comes down to. What that committee realized is that we were asking the wrong questions. We kept asking why guys joined, and we realized that we should have been asking why guys stayed.
Mm.
And once we did that, the thing that every single person said was, it's because of the guys. Like, well, hold on. Okay, so we're doing all these things where we're doing these 1-day classes, and there's nothing against 1-day classes. There's actually a way to do them in such a way that they're useful. Um, but instead of thinking about it as a destination, right? Like, I'm going to get it. I'm going to get something. I'm going to put it on a shelf. It's the idea of practice. It's the idea of making those connections. So, why do guys stay? It's because of the guys. It's because of the experience. There are guys we talk to who live across the street from a lodge, and they don't go, but they would drive 3 hours to a TO lodge or a lodge that really focused on education. Oh, wait a minute. So they won't cross the street for something that isn't meaningful, but they'll drive 3 hours for something that is.
Mm-hmm.
Or they will, or guys recognize that in some ways you can't expect every single lodge to give you everything you need. So we realized that there were guys who, yeah, they live across from a lodge and they go there because, well, on Thursday nights, Al brings his lasagna, and I like Al's lasagna. But when I really want to see a good degree, I want to go over to this lodge because, man, they just do some good work. Or, man, you've got to go to this lodge when they are talking about, this education series. And so for guys to realize what it is that is important to them, and then to find those lodges or those things that provide the experience. And that's why, honestly, for better or for worse, podcasts and conventions have done wonders because, like we said earlier, all of a sudden people have access to things, to ideas they didn't, or connections they didn't even know before, and that's okay. So instead of feeling frustrated because there's a lodge that isn't giving you what you want, here's a way to get what you want by focusing on the connections. And what I mean by that is, understand what our rituals for and what our proficiencies are for. Don't just yell at the guy to get those words right. I don't know. I always like to pair the newest entered apprentice with the oldest, crabbiest past master I can find. Right?
Yep.
Or how about this? As silly as it sounds, don't let anybody sit alone in your lodge. If somebody comes into your lodge, make sure there is somebody who sits next to them that's within about like 2 or 3 feet. In Ohio, we can do business in any degree, but there's certain things you can only do in fellowcraft, like a fellowcraft return. So you got to send an EA out in the hallway. Well, hell, have somebody go sit with the dude. We spend all this time saying, you're part of a brotherhood that will always be there. And like, oh yeah, by the way, you can't see this, go out in the hallway. And as silly as it sounds, probably one of the best ways to think about this is just be Masons, meaning focus on the connections, focus on that experience. What kind of experience were you looking for and did you want coming into the lodge? When you are walking on the lodge and you see those things up on the wall, instead of when somebody says, who's that picture? You go, oh, no. I don't know, let's find out together. Like, focus on the connections between the brothers and their community. For lodges that are struggling, and I want to say this because I know we're probably going to run low on time. One of the things I tell them about our ritual and it isn't even a ritual because it's the idea of like putting ritual into practice. Is if they're sitting there freaking out about like, well, that's great, Chad, you're saying these things, but I don't have enough guys to open the lodge. So what, fine, I get that. So with the guys you have, commit yourselves to one thing. But really two things. Something internal and then something external. Something internal that's just for the brethren. Just to again focus on those connections. Focus on, you know, maybe it's dinner before lodge. Um, Two really cool examples I've heard of, but there's so many that just think about the brethren of your lodge. What's something that's just them? Maybe it's t-shirts, right? They all have the same like lodges that they wear. But two cool examples that I love to death. There are masters in Ohio where the master and the senior warden stand inside the door and they shake a brother's hand as he walks into lodge. Like, hey, glad you're here.
That is cool.
And then when it comes time to do the purge and say, like, hey, it's time to start, they close the doors, take their seats, brethren, take this. And you talk about loneliness. Think about how many men go through their day without anybody actually making physical contact with them.
Mm.
But here's somebody who shakes their hand and takes a second and says, hey, man, I'm really glad you're here. It's a second, but just how much that means to that guy. And as a master and as a senior warden, um, how great it is just in terms of like controlling your meeting. I actually used to do this with my students. I would stand out in the hallway and like shake their hand as they came into class. It's amazing the stuff that would get solved before the bell ever rang. Is that, hey, Kopenski, I got to run and do this. Like, yep, go, great, thank you, good to see you. Like it.
Mm.
So the other cool thing that I saw, and it would take a very special lodge to do this, but there's a lodge I know of that um, as closing before they do the final wrap, they send all the visitors out, and all the brethren of the lodge come and they stand around the altar in a circle. And the master like reminds them of their obligations and says, "Guys, all right, what's going on? Like, what's good, what's bad?" And
Mm.
sometimes guys will go around and say, like, yeah, things are going on well. Like, I got this, promotion at work. But then there are guys who, at the meal before lodge, are like, hey, everything's great. But in that moment where they are just being brethren to each other, they're like, hey, my wife and I are fighting and it's going kind of hard. Or, I'm having this legal trouble. I'm not quite sure what to do or to talk to. Or I just went to the doctor and I'm really worried about this.
Mm.
But this is this moment at our lodge where it's just us, the brethren, being there for each other. So that's something internal. And then something external. We talked about guys want to be useful, right? Um, Guys want to be good on a good team. That's the other part I talk about when I talk about our ritual is, you know, um, ask anybody who's ever been in a really good theatrical show or been on a winning football team, and they'll talk about it. Why? Because they were good on a good team, and that it's a moment that means something to you. So let the brethren do good work, and some of it is so simple. Almost every lodge I've ever been to knows a school. Great. If you want to put something into service, then go and adopt the drama club and see what their wish list is and work towards filling that. If you can't do that, great. Like something external, something where you are putting your values into action. Maybe it's you call up the widows and you're like, hey, we're doing a day of service. What's one of those projects you're doing that, like, you know, every 6 months you go around to your widows and you change the batteries in their
Mm-hmm.
smoke alarms, or you change, or not even that, just something that you're doing, putting your values into action. What and what honestly happens, what I've seen in many lodges. Oh, another thing I've seen in lodges too that I think is awesome about like the adopting. So many lodges I've seen be successful in this. They go to the drama club or the football team and they say, okay, we're going to host our monthly breakfast. You, as the chess club, you provide the labor, we'll provide the breakfast, we'll split the door.
Mm.
And so the chess club comes in and they'll do the serving, rather do the cooking, which they're going to do anyway. And then, whatever pot they take at the door, they give to the half to the chess club. Every single one of the kids in the chess club is good for at least one or two adults. You also know that if it's a positive thing, that they're going to want to do it next quarter, next week. Next thing you know, you have the drama club and the chess club and Model UN and the football team all wanting to partner with the lodge. And the brethren, yeah, I mean, it's kind of expensive and kind of pain in the ass, but they're doing good work. So even if you are 6 months from closing, at least you're going to slide into home doing something good and worthwhile that you can feel good about.
Nice. I want to get you out of here on this one because I really appreciate the time and the bonus time that you gave us. Have
I
you ever
will listen,
watched?
man. I'll talk forever.
I know. I will listen forever. Have
That's
you ever
such
watched
a
the TV show The Bear at all on FX? It's on Hulu as well. The Bear.
I have. It's a that's a hard show to get into sometimes. It's not really a comedy.
No, it's not. And I'm so I'm so thankful. It's refreshing that you have watched this show because I'm going to make an analogy here. And well, you're talking about Christmas dinner and rethinking the ritual. It's the second season, the Christmas episode. That one
Yes.
is man. I was sweating and stressing watching that with the anti-family, just bad behavior that was happening there. So I'm sitting here thinking, like, okay, the idea of making our lodge experience like a Christmas dinner. How do we start that? What's the one simple thing that we could try to put into place to get our brothers in that mindset of let's make our ritual like having Christmas dinner with the family?
The way that I started with lodges is get, you can either do this with the entire lodge, but honestly, I have seen most lodges be successful with this as an officer team. You get your main officers, you go out to dinner, or you grab a pizza, you sit at the lodge, and you start talking about what what does it mean to be a member of this lodge? Like what and if that's a hard question to start with the ritual. Guys, what's that one thing you remember? Like what if you were gonna create like the perfect EA, like what's the one moment you want to make sure that we don't mess up?
Mm,
And then start that conversation. And then maybe start about talking about, well, okay, so what does it mean to be a member of our lodge? Like what is it that is really important to us? Is it important to us that we all wear tuxes? Okay, well then what does that mean? Is it important to us that we are out of here? But like what does it mean to be a member of this family? Okay. And maybe it is a set of principles or it is a set of ideas or questions or Ohio has a thing we use called the roadmap for improvement. And there's Michigan has something similar and so many other places do too, of just like a way to talk about values. Identify what your lodge values. And that's not a conversation that only happens once. I because and it's not something that you get perfect right away. It's something that's ongoing and developing. And if you're master, you're gonna get it. You're gonna take your thing 3 yards down the field. And it's not going to pay off for years, but at least you've done your 3 yards and you have that kind of plan. Who are we as a lodge? What does it mean to be a member of this lodge? And how do we make members of this lodge? And focus on those connections. Tell the stories. Make them see masonry the way that you do. But first off, maybe figure out what you guys as your lodge, but how do you see masonry? What's important to you? And go from there.
mm,
Does
I
that
love it.
does that help? Does that
Great. Yeah, that's solid advice. It's the simplest question because it's the hardest thing to do is to start making that idea into action and like where do we begin? And that's the best thing is like to get the leaders together and say, okay, like you said, what does it mean to be a member of this lodge? Like what do we know that we can do? And let's just focus on doing that and being awesome at it.
and don't take things for granted. That's the thing that I mean, do you know how many I'm fascinated by this guy named John Shearer, who's this like lithographer from the 1800s. And I have been to so many lodges where they have this great Shearer print up on the wall. And I asked the guys like, do you guys know what this is? They've walked by it 100 times. They have no clue. And here's this piece I've been looking for 10 years, that isn't supposed to exist, hanging on their wall. I'm like, do you not realize how cool this is?
Mm,
Um, be a tourist in your own lodge. I mean, all those things you take for granted. I mean, think about it like a new member.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they don't know the stories. They don't know why these things happen the way they happen. So do think about it like, do think about it like this is this is your daughter's fiance coming to your house. Okay, all right, dude. At some point, this is all going to be yours. So let me
Mm.
tell you what it means to be a member of this family. Here's the grill. Here's what the tools are. Here's how we cook chicken. And you know, I'll sit with you and we'll figure this all out together. Because better get that chicken right. Think about that way. Focus on the connections in the family, and everything else might not get fixed, but at least it'll be better.
It will. Brother Chad, I thank you so much for your time. I know we went a little over on the recording time. I can't wait to get you back on here. But thanks again for being on the Craftsman Online podcast.
Anytime, absolute honor. Absolutely, this was a thrill. So, and I'm glad you got to hear the storm.
Yeah, that was my dog is hiding